This video footage that I'm recording is not being passed through some type of lo-fi filter, or it's not some sort of effect you can put in Adobe Premiere. No. I am recording this directly on a 0.1 megapixel cartridge for the Game Boy, aptly called the Game Boy camera, released in 1998. The fact that I'm able to record this video on the Nintendo Game Boy camera in 2022, 24 years after it came out, is thanks to the obsessive preservation and constant innovation from enthusiasts for the Game Boy camera. Howdy, friends and foes. My name is Kat. I'm an artist, teacher, and I actually have an uncle that works at Nintendo. Okay, I should turn this thing off. So I've recently been obsessed with the Game Boy camera, and it's definitely an extension of my interest in art making, video games, and like old technology, and particularly my fascination with Game Boys. I started modding and taking apart and messing with Game Boys and making chiptune music with Little Sound DJ back in 2010, and have collected an absurd amount of Nintendo handhelds over the years since then. I don't know why I never really thought to use the Game Boy camera, because I knew of its existence and I loved photography and I loved Game Boys. I don't know why that path never got crossed until last year. I saw some really cool photos that were taken on the Game Boy camera last year, and I was immediately like, I gotta do that. And that opened the world of the Game Boy camera enthusiasts and the really dedicated community to this weird little peripheral. And thanks to their innovation and constant modding, my bank account has been dwindling ever since. So in this video, I'm gonna go in depth into the history and the technical aspects of the Game Boy camera, as well as talk about why I think it's seeing a really cool renaissance right now. And I'm gonna end the video in talking about how this inspired me to actually make a real Game Boy game about the Game Boy camera. So let's start off with talking about the history and the technical aspects of the Game Boy camera, because I find it super fascinating, but I'm probably gonna go maybe a little bit too far in depth. So back in 1998, Nintendo released the Game Boy camera almost a decade after they had released the original Game Boy in 1989. And 1998 was the same year that they came out with the Game Boy Color, which was my first console and the only gaming system I had for quite a long time. The camera was sold as the Pocket Camera in Japan, and despite having different names, they are essentially the same thing despite just language difference. And although Nintendo advertised this as funtography and sort of a device aimed towards kids, it was actually a really impressive piece of technology for the time. And in 1999, the Game Boy camera was awarded a Guinness World Record for the smallest digital camera. It's kind of amazing that this was the smallest digital camera in the world at the time, because it's just kind of a toy. The Game Boy camera was not Nintendo's first pursuit into making software or hardware for its users to create art on. Back in the 80s, they came out with Mario Paint for the SNES. Although Mario Paint was definitely geared towards drawing, there was a lot of philosophies that carried over into the Game Boy camera. They were both advertised as fun ways to create. They both had really unorthodox menu and UI systems, which I'll talk about. And both of them have weird mini games and animation programs, as well as music creation programs, which is kind of odd for both Mario Paint and the Game Boy camera. Nintendo had also released the Mario Artist Suite for the extension of the Nintendo 64 called the Nintendo 64 DD. But since the Nintendo 64 DD was kind of a complete failure, the application suite was also a failure, which is actually a bummer because, again, it was extremely advanced and cool for the time, and it was actually cross-compatible with Game Boy camera photos. I really want to make a video about Mario Paint and even Mario Artist as sort of a companion video to the Game Boy camera. So let me know in the comments if you would like to see something like that. I think it would be really fun to go deep into Mario Paint. And I actually want to talk about some old, weird art making programs like KidPix that were really influential for me in like digital art and stuff in the 90s. Let's now look at the physical and technical aspects of the Game Boy camera. The camera is the exact same as a regular Game Boy cartridge on the bottom, but the top has these bump outs, which is a bit atypical for a Game Boy cartridge. This is so it can support the iconic swivel head of the Game Boy camera that can actually turn 180 degrees. I think it's probably also the first selfie camera. The idea that you could just turn the camera around and take a picture of yourself was like fucking revolutionary. The lens and the sensor are mounted inside of the ball head of the camera. The CMOS sensor captures 2-bit 4-value grayscale images at 128 by 128 pixels. Although the Game Boy hardware itself can only display 112 by 128 pixels of those images. So it's actually slightly cropped. An interesting side bit of knowledge is that Nintendo actually revised the sensor for the Game Boy camera. So there is both a version 1 and a version 2 of the sensor. Cameras with the version 2 sensor are generally considered more desirable by Game Boy camera photographers because it's a bit sharper and has higher quality and better contrast, but it can be really hard to tell if you have a version 1 or a version 2. The only way to really tell is by opening up the cartridge and looking at the model number on the PCB. Also of note, Japan never got the second version of the sensor, so if it is advertised as a pocket camera, it will only be a version 1. You can also sometimes tell if it is a version 1 or 2 based on this little number on the sticker on the back. If it says GBD-1, that usually means that it is a version 2 sensor, but this is not 100% accurate. But while Japan never got version 2 of the sensor, America did not get some of the extremely cool color options that Japan did get, like the semi-transparent atomic purple version, which I want very badly. Bring back transparent gaming consoles. There was also a now incredibly rare Ocarina of Time version and is now worth hundreds to thousands of dollars. Anyway, the photos and software of the Game Boy camera are stored on the PCB, and it could hold up to 30 images at one time. That amount kind of seems like laughable now, but in the late 90s, that wasn't completely unreasonable. We will come back to this information because it is one of the points that has been innovated on in recent years. The lens that the Game Boy camera uses is unsurprisingly plastic, and it has approximately about a 45 to 50 millimeter equivalent focal length, which, by the way, I did personally test to see if it was accurate. When it was released, it was marketed with a companion device called the Game Boy printer, which was a portable thermal printer which you could connect to your Game Boy via a link cable and print out images from the camera onto receipt-sized thermal paper. The Game Boy printer could also be used with a small selection of other games like Link's Awakening, where you could print out specific designs and like pixel art from the game as Easter eggs, but its main design was focused on printing Game Boy camera photos. Game Boy camera photos could also be shared between cartridges if you had two Game Boys with Game Boy camera cartridges connected via link cable. I guess if you wanted to share and trade Game Boy pics on the playground instead of trading and battling Pokemon like a cool kid, you fucking loser. The drawbacks of this limited connectivity is that you couldn't save the photos off of the Game Boy camera cartridge, unless it was to another Game Boy camera. And the thermal prints are inherently temporary. They don't last forever. They fade over time, and the paper becomes kind of unusable after a while as well. Also, Nintendo forced you to buy a proprietary size Game Boy camera printer fucking paper that was extremely expensive. Thanks, Nintendo. However, there were some ways that you could view Game Boy camera photos on your television. The Super Game Boy for the SNES was compatible with the Game Boy camera, allowing you essentially to use it as like a webcam on your TV, and I guess you could save them to a VHS if you wanted to. Unfortunately, the Game Boy cartridge adapter for Nintendo 64 controllers was not compatible with the Game Boy camera because it was only compatible with Pokemon games, which was stupid. Now I want to kind of switch gears and talk about the really interesting things that have happened in recent years that have innovated on the Game Boy camera as a result of the really dedicated community of Game Boy camera photographers. In the last couple of years, there have been a ton of mods that have made the news for showcasing amazing and crazy attached zoom lenses onto the Game Boy camera that have been used to photograph race cars or the moon. These mods basically allow you to attach a lens that you would attach on a normal DSLR camera and hook it onto your Game Boy camera using a 3D printed adapter. The most common version uses Canon lenses, but other mods have been made as well, although none of these are terribly practical because the lenses are like gigantic. The reason why photographers are able to photograph things like the moon with clarity is because when you attach a large lens from a DSLR camera onto the Game Boy camera, it essentially acts as a giant magnifying glass because the sensor is so tiny. So it increases the amount of zoom it would provide to a normal camera by over 10 times, meaning a 50mm lens becomes a 500mm lens. This is also called a crop factor. To get around the absurdness of the crop factor when attaching normal camera lenses onto the Game Boy camera, and to get around the bulky and non-ergonomical aspect of the actual lens itself, people have developed a mod for attaching security camera lenses, also called CCTV lenses, onto the Game Boy camera, which are much smaller, cheaper, and provide a much more reasonable amount of zoom. Photographers also figured out pretty quickly how to take color photos with the Game Boy camera using a process called trichroming, which is an old process that has also been used in film photography. So one of the most common questions I get anytime I post a Game Boy camera photo or talk about the Game Boy camera is, how do you get photos off of the cartridge onto your computer? And there are actually a pretty good selection of devices that can do that. I use a cartridge flasher called the GBxCart, which can basically extract and put on save data as well as ROMs onto cartridges. And you can extract the save data from the Game Boy camera as PNG files and put them on your computer that way using the software. There is also the GB operator by Epilogue, which is, I would say, the most accessible option. There's also a adapter which basically tricks the Game Boy camera into thinking it's connected to the Game Boy printer and can transfer the photos via Wi-Fi onto your computer as well, which is pretty neat. All of this stuff has been developed by third parties and people who are just passionate about Game Boys and the Game Boy camera, which I just think is really cool that people have basically reverse engineered this to work cohesively with modern technology. And the device that I used at the beginning of this video to actually record essentially video from the Game Boy camera is called the PicNRec by Insidegadgets. Insidegadgets is the same brand that created all the cartridges that I've used for my game. And essentially it is similar to the GBxCart, where you slot the Game Boy camera into the cartridge, slot the cartridge into your Game Boy, which is a little bit silly. And this was just released a couple of months ago. And before this, there was no way to natively record video on the Game Boy camera. So even 24 years later, brand new technology that is expanding the usage of Game Boy cameras is coming out. And right now, there is actually a brand new frontier of people making custom PCBs for the Game Boy camera lens and sensor itself, essentially replacing the cartridge and the software on it to have custom built stuff, which could really open up possibilities of what you could do. And it's great for preservation because if there's something wrong with the cartridge of a camera, you could essentially use the lens and the sensor as a donor and make a new one. There is only a limited quantity of Game Boy cameras and original cartridges and original Game Boys. They aren't making more. So without this preservation, the technology could just disappear. I think the biggest question around why there is this almost cult-like following around the Game Boy camera is why? Why are people so obsessed with it? Why am I so invested and interested in it? What is it about the Game Boy camera that has entranced people? I think if I'm being realistic, an unignorable portion of it is nostalgia, right? A lot of people who are into it now had it as a kid and have positive, great memories of it, of a simpler time, especially when things are extremely shitty in the world. It takes you back to a positive place in your childhood. But I didn't have the Game Boy camera as a child, so I don't really have any nostalgia attached to it. So I think for me, a large part of it is the completely unique aesthetic that the Game Boy camera captures. There is truly nothing like it, and there hasn't been anything like it. It is so truly unique in the way that it abstracts the world into these dithered pixels and this almost like simplified, flat version of what your eyes can see. It's a completely new way of looking at the world in a way that other old digital cameras and old cell phone cameras didn't really capture. I think because the hardware was so limited that the Game Boy camera was using, I mean, it was almost 10-year-old hardware by the time it had already come out, that they were really trying to make things look realistic and almost make it look like pixel art, or that it could be part of a game. It converts the world into your favorite Game Boy game. And on the note of limitations, I think for a lot of enthusiasts, there's sort of a problem solving or a puzzle-like element to seeing what you can do with such limited hardware. We are constantly creating cameras with more megapixels, larger sensors. And like I talked about in my post-crypto video, this is kind of like a pushback against that, right? You only have approximately about 10,000 pixels to work with. It is 128 pixels by 112. But it's so freeing in the sense that you can then really consider all of the other aspects of the photos that you're taking, if you are taking it in sort of like an artistic way. Like, how far can you push this tiny little camera that was made 24 years ago? What can you do with it? How can you continue to innovate on something that's so inherently confined? I personally love that shit, not just with the Game Boy camera, but with things like Polaroids and any old technology. But I think for me, this intersected with my passion for video games and my passion for Game Boys in such a perfect way that I just became obsessed with it. So obsessed, in fact, that I made a whole video game about it. Which brings me to the last thing I wanted to talk about in this video, which is the Game Boy Camera Gallery, the game that I made all about the Game Boy camera. Wow. So when I became obsessed with the Game Boy camera last year, I immediately wanted a way to share sort of like a slideshow or an album of photos that I took on the Game Boy so that other people could look at it on their Game Boys in sort of their native hardware, the way that they were supposed to be viewed. Because I think a little bit of the magic gets lost when you view it on a computer or a phone. I had also recently participated in a really cool virtual museum project called the Zaya Museum, which I'm going to talk about when I do a video about virtual museums in the future. And so I looked into if anyone had made a virtual museum or a gallery or anything like that for Game Boy camera photos specifically, and I couldn't find anything. But with the powers of my ADHD hyperfixations, I learned how to make video game assets and a Game Boy game using GB Studio, which is a game engine specifically for making games for the Game Boy, which I would highly recommend if you are ever interested in making something like this. I sourced all of the photos that I used for this gallery project from friends, as well as the Game Boy Camera Discord group. I wanted it to be like a survey for the actual Game Boy Camera community. So after many dozens of hours of trial and error, I made the Game Boy Camera Gallery 2022, which you can go play for free in your browser on itch.io, or you can download it as a ROM, or you can even buy physical copies of it if you want. This is a plug. While this project was just initially going to be like a slideshow or like a simple album, it continued to grow and grow until I made a whole virtual little cute museum out of it. And it has 47 photos from over 24 photographers all around the world. It also has some cute characters in it, like a lazy raccoon gallery attendant and a pigeon. And it has some secrets as well, which I won't spoil. It was such a fun project to make and to work with other people on. And doing this project actually inspired me to consider pursuing game development as a potential career path as I kind of shift out of doing a lot of fine art. I plan on doing future iterations of this, and I want to kind of change up the style and the format of viewing these photos and make something interesting each year. Overall, the Game Boy camera just feels so fun and wholesome, and it is such a breath of fresh air as an approach to art compared to what I usually do or what the art world is concerned with. It's just fun. And I think there should be more room for genuine enjoyment and fun in art. So I hope you like this video about the Game Boy camera, and thank you for watching. And a special thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. I objectively love you more. If you'd like to support me and the channel and the things I make, go over to my Patreon where I post exclusive videos every single month. And you even get your name in the credits of each video. This was such a nice video to make. I had a lot of fun doing research and going into the technical aspects of it. I really want to do a video about Mario Paint, so please let me know if y'all are interested in seeing something like that. I also have some other videos planned about virtual museums, like I mentioned earlier, as well as some Artist Beware videos about my art school experience. But anyway, until next time, doing art. Did you know my glasses glow in the dark? Let's see if you can see it.